As we cross the threshold of 2026, we are greeted by a rare 111 numerological key, a potent frequency for new beginnings and the culmination of numerous cycles. This first full moon of the year on January 3rd acts as a celestial apex, bringing hidden issues to light, demanding a dynamic breakthrough in our beliefs. Hey there, Truth Seeker. Welcome to the Star Kittens community where we discuss 13th sign astrology. Are you in alignment with your divine design? Do you want to master the metaphysical reality? Open the doors of perception. Each planetary body is an archetype, a template, if you will, that helps us interpret human behavior and the world around us. The more awake and aware we are, the more synchronicity will show up in your life. Our focus today is the Gemini full moon with the Sun in Sagittarius conjunct Mars in the illuminating T-square with Ceres. To help us reach more souls with this important message, please like, share and subscribe. There is a lot going on, so let's jump in. Kia ora, David.
Kia ora.
We are recording this on the 1st of the 1st in 1 year, so new beginnings for probably a lot of people that live by this Gregorian calendar. And today we're going to talk about the first full moon of this new year. For those in New Zealand, it happens on the 3rd of January at 11:02 p.m. So David, what is the significance of a full moon? Let's give an overview of that first.
Well, the first thing is Happy New Year, and hope everyone's had a fantastic time with their family and whatever it is, a bit of relaxation and maybe some good food as well. And I'd also add that it's not only a 1 year, it's a 111. The first of 2026, when you add up all those numbers, is a 111, and that's quite a rare numerological key, if you like. So there is a lot of significance about 2026, and especially the first of the first. But generally, a full moon I would interpret as a time of culmination. It's a time of what I call revelation and realization. It's a time when a lunar cycle comes to an end, a 28-day cycle. And it may involve other cycles as well that are peaking at that particular time. Of course, we understand that there are many cycles going on at any one time. There's 7 cycles and 4 cycles and 10 cycles and so on and so forth. So it is, in this case, a super-duper apex or culmination of a series of cycles. And I'm expecting, given that it's in Sagittarius fire, that it will be pretty confrontational for many of us, and that there will be no place to hide for some, because there are issues that will emerge and come out of the woodwork, if you like, that are going to be fairly testing and emotional and challenging for us as well.
Yes. As you mentioned, Sagittarius, it is the Sagittarius season still. It seems quite busy where the sun is, but I think today we'll just touch on the sun in Sagittarius at 16 degrees, very close still to Mars at 17, and then the moon also very busy in Gemini, but we'll just be looking at the moon at 12 degrees Gemini. So we have a little bit of a theme lately where we have spoken a lot about beliefs, where they come from and how they culminate in our life. So please reiterate this Gemini Sagittarius opposition of energies at the full moon.
Yeah, it's amplified if I build on what I've just said about the full moon being a time of revelation and realization, and that there is some challenges here. The other side of challenges is also breakthroughs. So there's opportunity to whilst as much as there could be breakdowns, there could also be fairly significant breakthroughs. But we are talking about when Gemini and Sagittarius are in the mix, as we've touched on a previous podcast, but briefly, we consider Gemini to be the house of learning. So that learning predominantly takes place in childhood. We build our worldview step by step, piece by piece through experiences in the house of Gemini. So with the moon moving through there and conjunct with some other planets, but as I said, we're focusing predominantly on the moon in Gemini itself. What that will be stirring up is emotional resonances and connections back to childhood learning. And the amplification of that on the other side with the Sun and Sagittarius conjunct Mars is that some of those memories that may come back to us about those childhood learning experiences, they could confront us quite suddenly. When we're dealing with emotions, of course, sometimes we don't know quite where those emotions come from. They can just hit us out of nowhere. So under a full moon with Mars on the other side and in Sagittarius, which is a fire sign, and with the Sun in fire, we have a lot of heat effectively coming into the full moon. And the interpretation of fire being Mars and fire Sagittarius, and also the fire of the Sun, you've got triple fire on one side and you've got water and air on the other side. So naturally, if you were just looking at this from an alchemical perspective, and you think if you had triple fire on one side, if you were doing an experiment, you had three parts of fire, you had one part of air and one part of water, and you mixed those together, you would probably get an explosion. I mean, it stands to reason that when you put air and fire together, that leads to great sparks and friction. So from an elemental perspective, we've got not a lot of water to douse the fires. We've got a fair bit of childhood memories and the learning processes coming to the surface emotionally, some of which may not be particularly easy to deal with. This might be content that for some of us, reflecting back on our childhoods and the way we learned or what we didn't learn, for some that's a tailwind and for others it's a headwind. So there's this deep connection to childhood learning experiences which effectively were shaped by our siblings, shaped by our parents, shaped by the significant others that had an influence over us as children. And those beliefs, as I mentioned, were built step by step into what I call the Sagittarian worldview. So Sagittarius, for me, as I interpret it, and I don't ever talk about Sagittarius without first understanding the foundational aspects of Gemini, is that if we formed a set of beliefs in childhood, Sagittarius is where we stand on a personal philosophy. This is what I call our sacred cows. This is where we're prepared to die in a ditch, as it were. This is where we are prepared to really defend some of those beliefs. These are strongly held philosophies that we have. And this is why often when people talk about Sagittarius as a philosophical sign, I've heard many interpretations, especially in the 12 sign system, that Sagittarius is about wandering around the planet and going to lots of different places, and so therefore it's strongly associated with travel. But I go a little deeper than that and say that that desire to travel is actually about understanding the world, and that's how I arrive at the idea that Sagittarius is our worldview, but that worldview is underpinned by what we learned in childhood. So when we have the moon aspecting our childhood memories, and we have Mars in Sagittarius and the Sun and Sagittarius on the other side in a full moon setup, we have got the potential for strong reactions, in us as individual, and we're talking specifically about our own personal experiences as opposed to collective experiences. We get to the collective when we start talking about Aquarius and Pisces. So just to be clear and to draw a distinction, that this is very personal, and therefore for each of us it will be nuanced, and it will be highly just like an iris or a thumb scan. What I'm getting at is that it's unique and individual. Is that what one person experiences, somebody alongside them might not experience it at all. So there's potential for a lot of triggering here. The fire is triggering. The fire is stirring up potentially areas in our lives where we are very reactionary to life itself, where we hold dogmatic and even belligerent views of the world, where we are prepared to argue or hold a position, where we really dig in, where we experience defiance and particularly resistance to change. So all of those things are coming together at this full moon. But the beauty of astrology is that not always, but certainly in this particular case, we are given a context. So the question is, okay, so my childhood beliefs are being stirred up. I may be triggered. I may have an opportunity to review some of my worldview. But the question is about what? And for that, we can look to another part of the chart.
Yes, and we will get there shortly. What you just said to me really jumped out. Our experiences which come from Gemini are so individual. And on social media, Gabamate, I hope I pronounce his name correctly, he was talking about even if you have 2 or 3 or 4 siblings, none of them have the same parents, because it all is determined by, were you the first or the last? Were you the boy or the girl? Was the mum already a stay-at-home mum or not? So it's all those factors really influence your individual experience as a child. And I know there are plenty of families now in the last 5 years, they had the same upbringing, but chose to live life in totally different ways. And I think that really is because we all have different parents and we all have different siblings, which then determine how we view the world, how we stand in the world as adults, and how we stand firm on our beliefs. But as you say, indeed, this full moon, we are given a direction of where to look at. Where are we putting those beliefs in action as such? And that is because there is a T-square. So it's making a square with both the sun and the moon, and that is Ceres, Ceres. And Ceres is standing at 15 degrees Pisces. So please give us the archetype story of Ceres and then how she stands in the story today.
Yeah, very important that we touch on Ceres here. And what I will say about the T-square is that it is a geometric shape is formed within the cosmological arrangements here, with Ceres at the top of this triangle. So what that means is that you've got the sun and the moon on the bottom corners, and then at the top of this triangle with this apex, which again illustrates perfectly what I'm talking about with the full moon energies, is that the sun and moon are actually directing upwards to this focal point of Ceres. So Ceres is the focal point of this full moon, and I asked the question before about what, and we don't always have, sometimes a reading can be generic in the sense in that it says, yes, moon, emotions, fire, produces agitation and perhaps frustration, the potential for release or the potential for strong emotional resonance to be apparent. But we're not always given a context, and sometimes the universal intelligence, the way that the dice is rolled, that isn't always there. But in this case, it most certainly is. And we know that there is a specific focal point for all of these full moon energies because of this T-square. And as I said before, Ceres sits at the top of this triangular shape, so that makes her the focal point. So for those who haven't heard the story of Ceres, I'll briefly touch on it because it gives us some context for these childhood beliefs where we may be challenged in Sagittarius with the Mars conjunct Sun in Sagittarius opposite the Moon in Gemini at this full moon, where we may be challenged is in the area covered by the archetype of Ceres. Now Ceres, C-E-R-E-S, as you said before, and we're just spelling it out because sometimes people will hear Ceres, the asteroid, and they will think Sirius. No, it's Ceres, C-E-R-E-S. And she's known as the Earth Mother. And there's a very specific story about Ceres and her daughter. Ceres and the mother, but Ceres is also known as, when we have the Greek and the Roman versions of Ceres and Persephone, so they are interchangeable. But Ceres or Persephone was abducted, as the story goes, and these stories aren't to be taken literally. They are stories that help us to understand quite big issues through the lens of folklore. So Ceres or Persephone was abducted by Pluto, who was the lord of the underworld. So she was minding her own business, picking flowers, making daisy chains, whatever she was doing. She was on the surface of the earth and she was enjoying herself, and suddenly Pluto, or the archetype of Pluto, also known as Hades, grabbed her and took her to his underworld lair. So the first thing that comes up with that is that she was taken against her will. So this is a violation of her sovereignty. That's the first thing that strikes immediately. And there was quite a violence behind that action, because Pluto, in this case representing the male desire, saw with his eyes this young female and decided to take it for himself. No questions asked, he just used his power and force, and he deceived her into trusting him, and she was gone from the surface of the earth. So as she was abducted and was taken from the view of the surface of terra firma, the mother, of course, as any mother would, began looking for her daughter. And I'm paraphrasing, but effectively she couldn't find Ceres or Persephone because she was in this underground lair. And you can speak to this, of course, but she was beside herself. The mother was distraught. She'd lost her daughter. She's like, where's my daughter? And as these stories go, because we're talking about deities with great power, and I'm shortcutting basically to the meat of the story, there's a whole bunch of peripherals about some negotiations that were going on with her husband, and some deal that had gone on with her husband, who was Jupiter or Zeus, between Zeus and Jupiter and Pluto. They were also having a side discussion about this abduction. So the husband knew, but the wife and the mother didn't know exactly what had happened. So the husband, knew where the daughter was, and he could see his wife and the mother of his child becoming incredibly distraught, but didn't do anything about it. And so she used her great power to, as the Earth Mother, she threatened to effectively turn the land barren. All right, which meant that there would be no abundance, nothing thriving, nothing growing on the surface. And the story is that she began the process of using her powers to turn the world barren, until such time as Ceres was returned to her. So it became evident after a while where Ceres was. And so this tense negotiation took place between the father Jupiter, Pluto or Hades, and the Earth Mother to return Ceres to the surface. But the deal was struck that she would only come to the surface for half of the year. So you talked about the Gregorian calendar. For simplicity, let's just say for 6 months of the year. It might have been 3 months in the underworld and 3 months above, and then 3 months back in the underworld and 3 months above. But a total of 6 months she was in this underground lair with Pluto. And for the other 6 months, she was above the surface enjoying terra firma and everything that life has to give and offer. Now that's that story has so many layers and so much richness to it, but I'll only pull on a couple of threads in respect of this full moon, where we may be getting challenged in our childhood beliefs and in our adult philosophies or worldview, given that story, given where Ceres sits at the top of the apex between the sun and the moon, where the tension exists. This is pointing very much to, number one, the mother-daughter or the mother-child relationship and the pain of loss or the fear of loss. So an aspect of this full moon will be relating to parents and children. And I opened with, I trust that you had some time with family and an opportunity to experience this time of the year for what it's supposed to promise, which is a time of family. So at the full moon, what we're dealing with is a story of a schism between the mother and the daughter specifically, and the pain that is entailed. So that could be part of the emotional trauma. That could be part of the childhood memories. This could relate to, metaphorically, an absent mother. It could relate to some schism within the family dynamics. I'll let people make their own conclusions about that, because as I said, this is as unique as a thumbprint or iris, in that it's totally unique what you take from it. Another aspect of that is the power struggles and the dynamics that went on there within the relationship that Ceres had with her husband. He knew what was going on and didn't say anything. That speaks to another area of beliefs, insofar as there are often beliefs permeating in relationships that, this is for the greater good, for example. I'm not going to tell you something because I feel like you can't handle it, for example. That is coming from a childhood set of beliefs, or it could be expressed as a philosophy, so that you've got these power dynamics and you've also got this mother-daughter relationship. But the third aspect of it is to do with our relationship with the earth itself, with the earth mother. And this is a very deep subject, but suffice to say, this is about how we view the way that we live in harmony with the earth and her rhythms and her systems and her abundance. And the metaphor here of the mother, the earth mother, taking abundance away and freezing the earth, that is said to relate to the story of winter, which is a time of there's not a lot of life, and it's a time of reflecting that on the other side of that frozen period there comes sunshine and abundance, but on the other side of that is frozen and no life. And so you've got this circular nature of the seasonal cycles of, it's not always cold and wintry, and it's not always hot and summery. It could be that for a short period of time, and then inevitably the cycles will change. So we've got these three, as I interpret it, these three distinct areas to consider at a full moon, where we could be getting emotionally stirred up and confronted, where our beliefs are on the table, where we could have breakdowns or breakthroughs. But Ceres is giving us a context that perhaps when we're examining this, we need to perhaps look at the relationship we have with our parents, that's between children and parents, the relationship that we have with a significant other, and the power dynamics within those relationships. And thirdly, our relationship with the Mother Earth herself. Are we in harmony with her? Are we working with her rhythms, her cycles, her resonance, her energy? Or are we working against her? Because ultimately she has the power to make it pretty miserable for us here on earth. She also has the power to make our life very abundant and our experience very positive. So the Earth Mother is, the archetype is one to respect. We need to respect, which again is a belief. And it's to respect the feminine power of creation and destruction as well. So there's a bunch of things tied up in there, but I think that there's enough of those in between those three threads that people will get a specific context of. If you're feeling a little agitated at this full moon, it may well be in the area of power dynamics within relationships and family. It could be relating to your children if you're a parent, or it could be relating to the way that you are feeling and experiencing the earth itself in terms of her abundance, or the other side of that, which would be scarcity, which often are both a physical manifestation of our mindset. So we can have an abundance mindset and therefore we will likely experience abundance on the earth, or we can have a scarcity mindset and therefore that's what we also will experience.
Yes, and then of course in the Northern Hemisphere they are living in this darkness right now of winter, and here in the Southern Hemisphere we're living in the beautiful sunshine, although we haven't seen much of that the last couple of days. I have really enjoyed this telling of you about Ceres. We have talked about her before, but I think really pointing out these three different areas has been really helpful. And then of course, how does that relate to our beliefs and where do our beliefs come from? So thank you, David. For those listening and you would like to follow us on social media, I've just started a series of the true position of the planetary bodies and how we are truly in Sagittarius right now. You can find us on Instagram. It's Starkittens 13 sign. You can find all our videos on YouTube and listen on the go on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and wherever else you're getting your listening podcasts from. Any parting messages from you, David?
Nope, not today.
Not today. Thank you. Until next time. Ngā mihi.
Namaste.